Okay, welcome everybody. It's really great to see you all. I hope you're dry or getting dry. We're getting some nice sunshine down here, so I hope it's the same for you all where you are. Um, we are really excited about this second Digging Deeper of the year. And this one will be focused on rubrics. So a couple of different aspects of them, really thinking about how do we support candidates in using rubrics as they are developing their performance assessments. And then also, how do we support candidates in understanding how to effectively use them for working with their students and assessing their students. So, sorry, I'm a little distracted. People are jumping into the waiting room here. But again, so I'm going to, we'll introduce some CTC introductions first. I'm Zoltan Sarda. I am the lead consultant with the Gen Ed CalTPA, but we all do cross-purpose work. So I've been having my fingers in all kinds of aspects of this work. And with that, I would like to introduce Heather.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Kennedy. I am one of the other consultants with performance assessment here at CTC. My main work is with the new literacy performance assessment that is currently in its pilot study. And then I also do a lot of work with our ed specialist, CalTPA. And then I will go ahead and let Julie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Holmes. I am the newest consultant to the team, and it's great to be here. And I'm supporting the Gen Ed and the SPED TPAs and learning from Zoltan and Heather. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay. And so we have a trio of presenters today. And again, as with all of these, we have some expertise to be presenting, but we also know that all of you have deep expertise. So we're hoping for a nice dialogue as we move forward. One of the things that I think have been really useful in these Digging Deepers is the use of the chat. I love it when people are presenting and other folks, participants are adding their thoughts or resources into the chat, and we will save that chat so that we can post that as well, because that's a really important way that we can bring all the perspectives together here. So, and then also as we move forward, just feel free to, if you have a question, feel free to unmute. The CTC folks will be monitoring the chat if you have questions that you would like to ask the presenters. But with that, I'm going to turn it to Heather to introduce the first pair of our presenters.
Yes, so our first set of presenters are both from Riverside County Office of Education. We have Alan Hallis and Andrea Mazo. They both do a lot of work with us on the Ed Specialist CalTPA and have been really involved with that work since its pilot study phase back in 2020, so for quite some time, and have a lot of insight to provide for us surrounding the use of rubrics for candidates and the way candidates can use rubrics with their students. And while their expertise is an ed specialist, this insight is definitely applicable to the Gen Ed CalTPA as well, because there's so much crossover between the design of those two assessments. So definitely great information for all of our programs and candidates.
And Alan and Andrea will be followed by Isabella Gutierrez. I'd like to unmute and say hello, Isabella. But Isabella is our resident expert on early childhood education and the performance assessment. So Isabella is the director of child development programs with the West Hills Community College District. She had joined us for the development on our design team of the California formative teaching performance assessment, which is focused for early childhood educators. And she is currently a design team member on the literacy performance assessment. So we're keeping her busy here.
Yeah, definitely.
But she will follow Alan and Andrea. So, so I guess we will turn it over to Alan and Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get it started. Alan, do you want to say anything about what you do directly as I'm getting everything pulled up?
Yeah, just as you're pulling up, you know, we've been involved with this work for a while now, as Heather was saying. I've been more intimately involved with cycle 1 and Andrea is more involved with cycle 2, so we could bring some perspectives from both of those sides. And certainly with cycle 2 really focusing on those rubrics, Andrea is the voice in the room that I certainly want to hear. So we're excited to be with you today.
Thank you. And Alan and I are both administrators at the County Office of Ed. Alan actually oversees our Ed Specialist Intern program there. And I am in the process of almost completing the writing and revisions of our new PK3 credential. So that's our work that we do every day, but we also love getting involved and working with the TPA. And as Alan said, he's the lead for cycle 1. I'm the lead for cycle 2. So that's what we've done since the inception of it. And what we're going to look at today is really, we're going to review some of the state data that's just come out for cycle 2. We're going to talk about how we can ensure that our candidates are choosing appropriate rubrics. And this really does affect cycle 2 going through the formative assessment process. And it's something that we are scoring our candidates on. And then we're going to end by talking about how we can provide and receive feedback and what we can do for our candidates going through our teacher prep programs to making sure that they are prepared when they are tackling the TPA themselves. So we're going to look first. I asked Heather to send to us the state data that has just come out and kind of do a quick overview of what we see right now. And so this is the first attempt passing rate on our last ones that just came out. Cycle 1, 23-24, we had an 84% pass rate for the multiple subject, single subject. Cycle 2 had 93%. Those are great numbers. MMSN, so that's our mild, moderate support needs students. We're at 94 and 97. And then our extensive support needs students, we're at 97. And look at that, cycle 2, 100% for extensive support needs. So that was, to me, impressive right there. So congratulations to all of you teacher prep programs. We're actually doing really well throughout the state with our scoring. I wanted to also look a little bit at some of the scoring for our rubrics. You know, a level 3 is where we start off and what we're looking for when we're trying to determine a passing rate with our rubrics. So as a scorer, and as Alan and I train the scorers, we're looking at our level 3 areas. And this is kind of like what we are seeing as the averages that are coming out for the cycles. Now, what you're seeing right here is the average for like the first rubric, and this is Alan's rubrics that Alan's doing in cycle 1. So these are kind of our averages that are going through, and this is what we're seeing with our candidates. And so the averages are going okay. We might have a little bit of the MMSN rubric 1.6, same 1.6 in our MMSN, and then same 1.6 in the ESN. So that's just something for us to consider as programs, that might be a rubric that we need to look at a little further with our candidates that are going through the program. Just looking at the data here, that seems to be an area of concern for all 3 across the board. And then I wanted to go a little bit deeper with the cycle 2, because this is where candidates have to use rubrics as they're scoring through them. So looking at our multiple subject, single subject data, again, rubric 2.6 and 2.9 are ones that we would like to consider. And 2.6 actually does deal with rubrics itself. So that's part of the reason why I think this data is really interesting to see, because we're seeing some trends across all programs at some areas that we might want to look up and kind of try to support a little bit more with our candidates to help them with the passing. Looking at the MMSN cycle 2, and this is the one that I help score and oversee. The areas that were a little bit of a concern really were 2.8 and 2.4. So our technology one was a little bit low, And then 2.8 is kind of our looking at our assessments and determining what our next steps are going to be, and kind of interpreting that data that we have. And then looking at the ESN, again, we had that 2.6, which does have to do with rubrics that are being looked at by our candidates with their students. So overall, 2.6 and 2.8 are some areas that we should consider. And then we had a couple of little more areas to look at for some of the other, for the testing for the MMSN. 2.9 might be a rubric to focus in on a bit. But what's important, I think, and what you have to remember is that right in here, we really have a trend of just some areas that are just scoring a little bit lower for us. And this is also areas that portray the videos that we're looking at. 2.3 is also a video scoring rubric as well. So over half of the TPAs are scored in cycle 2 off of the videos that the candidates are showing us. So it could affect their score a little bit, and not having a rubric really could be something that it could affect, 1 or 2 points with them passing, not using a correct rubric in the TPA. And then what I also wanted to show was 2.8 really is an area of the data interpretation, and they do their data interpretation for 2.8, their analysis based on their rubrics. So rubrics really do run through this entire TPA. So I want you to think for a second. Does your institution, your teacher prep program, with your own data, do you think that overall this could be an area of consideration for you to review your rubrics with your candidates that you have? And think about how many candidates, could have possibly passed with maybe 3 or 4 more points that could have been lost due to not having a proper rubric. And then also consider, what resources do you currently have at your program that could help your candidates around this area, especially when considering choosing a proper rubric to use in the TPA process. So I'm pausing for a moment. I've been told before I don't pause enough, so I'm pausing for a second. So our question that we'd like you to think about, that we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, is, can candidates increase their score by using appropriate rubrics in the TPA? And I want to propose that yes, they can. As a scorer, it really needs to be something we consider. And so I wanted you to see in the material itself where rubrics, specifically the use of rubrics, is called out. So in rubric 2.1 of cycle 2, we are looking at their learning segment that they're planning, and part of it says assessments and rubrics. We're trying to see if they all align and if they are at the correct developmental grade level for the students. So rubrics is called out in 2.1. And in 2.2, also, we're looking at the entire plan with rubrics, and we're looking to make sure that, again, it's standards based. So that's 2 areas where the rubric is important for them to have. And in constructs 3, as a scorer, we are looking for rubric-based evidence. In construct 4, as a scorer, we're looking that your rubrics clearly align with the learning goal. And then looking at 2.2, and I know you're seeing rubrics here and then rubrics there, but we score on a scoring rubric. So, and then this is what we're looking for as level 3 evidence. We're making sure on rubric 2.2 that candidates use, they're using the rubrics again. So right there, you can lose points. A candidate can lose points if they're not using a rubric. And what I'd like to propose is, what we see a lot of scorers, and I think the multiple subject scorers see this as well. A lot of times candidates are proposing and using checklist with their students. And a checklist doesn't really show a continuum of learning. We're looking for a continuum of the learning that the students can see where they're scoring currently and what could be the next area. How can they move up in their understanding? So we're not looking at a basic checklist. We're looking more at a continuum for a rubric to be there. And if a candidate is using a checklist, that's going to take them down from a score of a 3 to a score of a 2, possibly in our rubric 2.1 and 2.2 right off the bat. So I wanted to show you why it's so important to, have that emphasis with them about using these rubrics, because right there, that's 2 points that we could be losing off of our TPA scores. Let me find my mouse again and go to the next score. I have a hard time talking and moving sometimes. Now also it's, we see that it's a requirement in the teach steps. This is part of the video steps. They have to show themselves using the rubric for the students, where the students are self-assessing themselves. Well, if they're using a checklist, that's not a rubric, so that will cause their score to go down a little bit. And then at 2.7, how does the candidate use the results from their rubrics? If they've used a checklist for both the student assessment and then for their formal assessment, if it's a checklist as well and not a rubric, they will lose a few points on 2.6 and 2.7. Because when we are scoring, we again look for the rubric in 2.6, and then the rubric or the student self-assessment in 2.7. So that could be some more points that your candidates are losing. So right there, that's about 4 points that could possibly be taken off of a TPA score just for not using a rubric. And then again, we have step 2.8. And this is an area that, as I was showing you, this is an area that all three multiple subject, single subject, our MMSN and our ESN, there's a little bit of a concern of how our candidates are doing here. Looking at our last bit of data, they're using their rubric to analyze the formal assessment results. Well, if they haven't chosen a real rubric, their analysis will be a little bit off. And then if their analysis is not within a continuum, they don't give us maybe as succinct feedback, and that can affect the feedback that they're providing to the families and or the guardians. And that's an area when we're looking at the scoring, as I'll show you on the next slide. It specifically calls out using that rubric data when we're doing the analysis and giving the feedback. So in theory, not using rubrics, that could be about 5 points for a TPA that a candidate could not be gaining just because they haven't picked the correct tool going in from the beginning. And so, Alan and I have been talking about this a lot, and we really felt that this was an area that looking at different teacher prep programs, this could be a small adjustment that some of our programs could make that could really have a big impact on our students going through them and could really help raise their TPA scores as they're getting ready to submit. So we have a folder that Zoltan will be sharing with you. And this was just something that Alan and I had kind of worked on gaining just some different resources for you to consider passing on to your candidates. Alan, especially because Alan and I are scorers and we do work with teacher prep candidates, we're very careful about what we do say to them, but we can refer them to look at some different resources on rubrics so they can have a great understanding on what a rubric really is. And so we kind of curated that for you. And then just some, even some samples of some tables that are being used in different classrooms. I looked through and Alan looked through. We've been trying to grab some things there too. So sometimes candidates just want to see, well, what does it look like in a third grade classroom, in my multiple subject third grade room? What kind of a rubric could I use? So we just found some different other resources that you can direct candidates to look at, just to see rubrics that have been used in action, and it's other teachers with their advice from it. So I thought that was nice, because anytime we can have teachers helping talk to teachers, it's just really a good feeling in education. And then the thing that, and this part Alan's going to talk a little bit more about. I know you've been listening to me real quickly. I had this whole cycle 2 part that I really wanted to stress, so Alan allowed me to do that. So I appreciate that. But just how can, when you're setting up your program, having that peer feedback together, having the peers support each other, how can that help with the TPAs? And then also, then how does that help with our teachers and their continuous improvement as they're entering into the field? So Alan, would you like to say a few things about this part, and I can kind of click through and I'll add in too?
That sounds perfect. Really appreciate all that great stuff, Andrea, on cycle 2 for sure. I guess I'm going to start off just by what I'm seeing in the field, TPA, and just in the day-to-day classroom. Meaningful feedback is tough. I don't want to be that old guy shaking my fist at the clouds, but just the instant gratification, the taking the time to really look through rubrics, to look through feedback. I hear a sense of disquiet throughout the whole educational system, right? Our teachers talk about how intentional they are in creating these rubrics and giving feedback to kids, and then they find the paper crumpled up under the desk or next to the wastebasket, right? We hear our supervisors, who are such amazing professionals and wanting to help our novice teachers grow, and giving them these detailed observation forms. And I put this in every observation form, and this is the 6th time I'm still seeing it. Didn't you read it? So, feedback is tough, and we all receive feedback differently. So really just establishing the value around feedback and rubrics, and setting that basis for your candidates, we've found to really make a difference when we've been intentional in modeling it throughout the program. So I think we're going to talk about a couple different examples there.
Mm-hmm.
So that ongoing practice is really, really important. We try and model our observation forms and cycles and everything to kind of mirror the TPA and some of the activities that they're going to be doing. We ask them to create rubrics throughout the program, throughout the year. It's not something that just pops up in the assessment class or in cycle 2. And even more importantly, we want them to interact with the rubrics that we create. So we have certain assignments where they actually look at the rubrics for their observations with their supervisors, where they talk about the different components. We ask them, what could be added, what could be changed, how do you receive feedback? Just to get them thinking about the different ways, to really organize and receive that feedback so they can use it, right? This isn't, as Andrea said, it's not a checklist. It's not, oh, well, it's because we have to do this. This is good practice, right? This is meaningful stuff. But it's a little bit like UDL these days, right? It's not one size fits all. It's not, how I give you this feedback is going to be the same from candidate to candidate or student to student. So I think having that conversation and modeling it throughout is really, really important. If we can go back, Andrea, I'm sorry. The other thing too is people are busy, especially we know our students and beginning teachers, they just don't have time for anything additional. So really dedicating that time to review rubrics, making that a focus of an evening or of a PD session or of something that they already have to attend, some of the mandatory parts of your program, is really so invaluable. Otherwise, it's going to be really tough. You know, this isn't the jazziest homework assignment or independent study. You know, rubrics are not for everyone. And I don't mean to offend the rubric fans in here. And there are some people who will, you know, read thousands of pages on this and be very, very contented. But really dedicating the time, again, not just for candidates, but for faculty. Having your supervisors really understand those observation forms, getting their feedback and buy-in on editing and tweaking and updating them, making them living documents, and like I said, having those assignments where they have to discuss it with the candidates they're supporting really builds the efficacy and the expertise on both sides there. So that's really important. And just the macro and micro views, you have to go over this with candidates from the big level to the, okay, let's look at this one specific construct and this one specific rubric. And you have to do that and cycle it over and over and over again. And this is just an ongoing conversation. They are going to forget what is in the rubric for, you know, cycle 2.3, probably 3 days after you just spent, you know, a whole night going over it with them. You know, they have a lot on their plates, a lot in their mind. So you have to build in those opportunities for them to really interact with it on both levels, right? Let's look at the whole big picture here. And then let's take a look at these small chunks and just cycle through that. And then lastly, you know, the one thing we tell them over and over again, and I know the CTC is so great about reminding the field, this is not a lonely journey through the TPA. They can lean on each other, right? You know, peers can talk about this stuff together. They could think about how they're going to approach their lesson and these cycles. They could review the rubrics. So we really do have both self-organizers where they can go through and check and make sure the components of the rubrics are there in their planning and their submissions. But they could also do that with peers where they can take a look and really get into the nitty gritty for each cycle, for each step. You know, does this make sense to you? Is this a checklist? Is this a rubric? So if we can go to the next slide, it's just a little screenshot that we do have for what each step looks like for the cycles we go through with our candidates. And we found it was really important to make sure each checklist starts with, did you actually review the assessment guide? Did you actually look at the essential questions? Did you actually look at the rubric? Do you know how many pages this is supposed to be? Those things are really, really important, again, because sometimes the candidates just want to jump into it, right? They're nervous, they're excited, they just want to get to the, you know, the meat and potatoes, but a lot of times they don't really take that time to pause and go through, you know, what they actually need to be producing in that great level of detail. And we've gotten a lot of very, very good feedback on these types of checklists. Again, we give them time in their courses or their practicum sessions or, you know, different seminars to where they can work together and go through these materials in great depth.
And then just to add in there, you know, at times it's nice for them to hear from each other. So if you have other candidates that are going through your program that have just finished the TPA and they've just, you know, passed and everything's done, having them talk with our candidates that are going through it has been just really kind of a game changer, because it gives them that I don't know, hope for the future. They're like, okay, they did it, I can do it. And then sometimes you know, having the ones that have just passed, you know, they will form their own little groups and they will get together and they'll talk about, hey, can I send this to you? Can you check this out? And then they start to be that own support system. And that's just been great, because then we see the connection within the programs between the little, it's almost like they've made their own little cohort themselves and they're getting through it and they're going to support each other through it. So just, you know, having them talk about what has worked best, what their best practices are, that's really been a game changer for us too. So, just thinking for a second as we're kind of ending our little talk part, and we will definitely take questions and we can talk with you guys further, but what additional supports can you add that you are currently, and I have a misspelling there. Oh, that just drives me crazy. Okay, that you can add to for your candidates at your institution. What can you do? What little changes can you make that could really help them as they are going through the TPA themselves? So just thinking about that, what can you do? Because we can always improve. We're always in our cycle of continuous improvement ourselves. So what are some things that you could do? What are some takeaways? Could you talk about what a rubric actually is with them before they start cycle 2? What kind of supports can you do? And then can you start having them have those little cohort support groups, those little groups where they can give each other feedback? And if you have questions or concerns, you can definitely email Alan or myself. We do work together at RCOE. We're there every day. Alan's there like every weekend too. It seems like he's working all the time, but we just appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys about this. I did see that maybe there was a question out there, or maybe there was something in the chat. If you do have anything, please feel free to unmic and we can talk about it. And I'll stop sharing right now.
I have a question. Is that self-check and peer check slide a part of the slide, part of the slides that you have on Google for us to look at it later?
Yeah, it's a great question, Karen. I can make sure we add some of those checklists to that Google folder. I apologize, they're not in there yet, but I can drag them in once we're done.
I think that's a great activity for them to engage in with their peers.
And I'd also like to add, if you all have things that you're using that are similar to these resources, if you can put them in the chat, or you can email me, and I will make sure that they get added to the folder too. We're hoping that this folder will be just a comprehensive resource around this. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what folks have to say about, your experience with candidates in relation to what Alan and Andrea spoke about. And I'm putting access to the folder in the chat. So I see Jude has a question. Can candidates use existing rubrics from the curricula they are using? Alan or Andrea, do you want to take that one?
I mean, as long as it's fitting into the cycle of the lessons that they're teaching, because they're teaching a lesson series. If there is a rubric that is used that they feel is comprehensive of the learning outcomes and objectives that they're looking for, and it is a rubric that shows a continuum of learning, then that's what we're looking for with a rubric. Dr. Wolf.
It's Jude. Sorry.
That's
I'm Dr. Wolf to my students.
You can be Dr. Wolf to me too, but yes, I mean, I would say that absolutely could work in that case, but that's kind of, I don't know, when I'm looking as a scorer to see that, if I'm seeing that they have a rubric that's meeting the learning goals. And sometimes, the rubrics that are coming in the base kits, they might not have all of the goals that they're looking for. So it might be a good base for them to use it, but they might want to recreate it slightly with the learning goals that they're focusing in just on the TPA, just so that they make sure that that is listed in there, because that's what we're looking for as a score. Is it continuum of practice, and are those learning goals that they've set forth, are they listed in that rubric that they're working on with their students?
Got it. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. They just get so scared about how to create rubrics. And so having a model example from which they can adapt. And we're good. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was some of the ones that we that Zoltan will have in that folder that's being shared with you. Some of those links are just to just websites that just show examples of different rubrics for different grade levels. And sometimes that's all they need to kind of spark that idea in their head, and then they're ready to go. They just need to see something.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add such great advice. I think we see more and more kind of canned programs or packaged programs that our candidates do use. And I know in some ways they're a lifeline to a newer teacher, right? Because it does give them, I know what I'm doing tomorrow. And as Andrea said, it's a great launch point. But remember, there's a level of intentionality that need to be there with these cycles, with these lessons, with how they're assessing these specific learning goals. I always say use it, but make sure it includes the EL goals in there. Make sure if are there IEP goals that you could tie in. So it's a great place to start. It definitely helps lower that anxiety and gives them a draft to work from. But I always encourage them, don't just stop there, right? You really need to make this about your lesson and your kiddos, because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for as assessors, right? We don't want something that could be used in any classroom in any lesson. We need to see you put the thought in that it's for your kiddos to meet these goals.
And if I could just add, one of the things I hear from candidates in office hours and folks emailing is when they're using a curriculum that is, as you said, Alan, really nicely laid out for them. Sometimes they have a difficult time figuring out what are the standards, what are the California standards that go with that. And so that idea of choosing the standard and then building the learning goals off it, and then building the assessments off of those learning goals and those standards, it's almost like you want to see that line straight through. And I think I've seen candidates a little bit confused about, well, I'm not sure what standard to cite here. I'm using this program. So support in figuring out that and then developing the learning goals from that standard is really needed for some of them.
Yeah, and some of the direct instruction programs that some of our special ed teachers use, they weren't necessarily written in the state of California, so they don't have the California standards tied to them. So that's why it really sometimes can be just a little bit difficult if they're not looking at it from, standards first, and then what is happening, what instructions do we have, what are our learning goals going to be. So I have nothing against the direct instruction programs. I think that some of them are so useful and can be so good for some of our students, but they really do have to make sure that they're aligning with the learning goals and they have the standards there with them, that they can easily show that through line to all the way through the lessons.
All right, so why don't we move to our next phase and focus a little bit on early childhood, and then we'll come back for a discussion further as we move forward. But again, also don't be shy about adding resources that you have. We really want. I know that many of you in the group here have all kinds of things that you're using with your candidates, and so we want to really make them available to the group. But I'd like to introduce Isabella Gutierrez again. Again, she focuses on early childhood and was part of the CalTPA development. I know from that work that there was quite a bit of discussion about that rubrics are even more new to the early childhood field than to gen ed field. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Isabella, but we had many discussions in regard to that. I also just want to make a point that, so the CalTPA uses a 5-point rubric. The CalFTPA, that Isabella was part of the design team, uses 3-point rubrics for assessing candidates. And so with that, I'll turn it to Isabella. And thank you, Isabella.
Yes, no, I really don't have a lot to say other than I was privileged to be part of these work, and I truly felt heard in bringing my perspective about what has been working in the field of early childhood education. And to me, it was very important that my voice was heard, because I wanted to make sure that the practices that have been working for years, that they were valued and they were included, and that they were gonna be part of these teacher performance assessment, and that there was a big discussion about the rubrics and whether, you know, it was appropriate in the early grades and in TK and preschool, and you know, we went back and forth in regards to that. But one of the biggest things that I think that is important for future teachers as they're going through the teacher performance assessment and thinking about rubrics as they're in programs that support, you know, these new educators, is that we kind of have like a parallel process in regards to rubrics. You know, they're learning to utilize rubrics and or demonstrating their knowledge about how they utilize rubrics with students. Well, at the same time, as assessors, you know, those of us that also went through that of assessing the submissions of these future educators, we also use rubrics. And so the rubrics are like the Bible. If you just align yourself with the rubric and value the rubric, they will do amazing. You know, it's very important that they keep that in mind. And I love to hear how you know, there's all these efforts to make sure that candidates understand how to implement rubrics, how to create rubrics, and then that will give them confidence also to know that their submissions are being assessed through the lens of a rubric. You know, it's not arbitrary. It's written.
Okay. And well, and with that, perhaps I'd love to hear maybe a discussion from the group about, so one of the questions we get a lot of, and we do have some responses for candidates, like in office hours, for candidates that come to our office hours, is how do you design and use a rubric with early childhood? So either TK or kindergarten or even first grade. You know, one of the things that we get is that our children can't read yet independently. So one of the pieces of advice that we give is that the children don't have to read the rubric. They can be supported. It can be a literacy support activity. But I'd just love to hear, building off of Isabella's thoughts about working with young children and teachers in the early grades. What are you finding that's useful for supporting candidates in those grades? And feel free to unmute.
Well, the scoring guides that I use with my kindergarten and first grade candidates are filled with, instead of descriptors, they're filled with pictures. And so they can use the pictographs to self-assess or to provide evidence of understanding.
Great. Really supporting the literacy aspect of that. Okay. Other success stories with working with young candidates in younger grades?
So Tom, part of the things that I've seen when looking at the PK3 credential and kind of working with some of the development of the program, looking at rubrics that have like I can statements, like I can, and then what are they looking to do? I can read 3 sentences, or I can read 2 sentences, or I can read one. So you know that it is for reading. We have a continuum there of the simple things that we want, but it's written as an I can statement. So it's very simple for them because it becomes repetitive at like a TK level. I can, and then whatever that learning goal is becomes, and it's predictive for them. You use it for many different content areas in the classroom, and it becomes something that they easily understand.
Okay. Well, why don't we open up to other resources, other success stories, other questions that you might have for our presenters at this point? Or even what's your biggest sticking point still? What has not been answered for you at this point?
One of the things that I'd like to stress is that when the university is providing guidance for our candidates, it's really important that we are ensuring that we are using a rubric when we're calling it a rubric. Oftentimes I will see or hear have the students fill out this rubric, and what it is really a scoring guide. It's not a rubric, and so we're kind of sending mixed messages or an incorrect model. So we really need to make sure that we're using a rubric with our candidates when we're using the word rubric.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll throw in one more thing. Working with our candidates in special education, they are used to writing IEPs. I mean, their life is writing IEPs, and there is not just a little overlap, right, that you can kind of steer them towards, right? Like taking a present levels of performance and turning it into a goal, very similar than taking a learning objective or a lesson objective and turning it into a rubric, right? There's a lot of overlap there. Coaching them and showing them that they could just pull some of that same prompt and same language, right, from their lesson plan, dragging it over to the rubric, and really reinforcing to them that there has to be a level of detail, right? They can't just write their IEPs with, their goal is they need to learn to read, or they need to do a problem. The specificity has to be there. So I always think couching it in terms of their IEP writing, which consumes so much of their life early on, since I work with intern teachers, really, really helps with this rubric development. And it really does kind of let them see it in a more practical lens.
And Bev, I see you have a discussion about ESN rubrics, that there's been an area of difficulty. Could you maybe let us talk a little bit about what are those areas of difficulty that you're seeing with your candidates on those rubrics?
Sure. Just, excuse me, when we have students who are nonverbal, I have candidates who are working with students who are legally blind, and they're young. They're little TKers or kindergarten. Some of them are first and second grade. They can't read. And so they're having a difficult time coming up with what they feel would be they keep calling it a good enough rubric. They're just always afraid that it's not going to be good enough because it's not going to be too detailed or too specific. And you just brought that up about the specificity. So just curious, if anyone has any good suggestions that I could pass on to my candidates and my coaches.
Thoughts on that one? I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind, and I'd love to open it up to your all thoughts. And it was touched on a little bit before here about that idea of how can we still describe levels of performance, but not necessarily have it be text-based, or not necessarily have it be visual, or how there's what are the varieties of ways that we can communicate levels of performance to our students in ways that are not. I think in my mind, even when I'm thinking about a rubric, I'm thinking about a piece of paper with basically a chart on it, like we have in the TPA. And so, are there ways that we can unhook the discussion around levels of performance from, particularly in terms of the student self-assessment? I think that's what you're talking about. But how can we unhook it from there and bring in a variety of different ways of communicating?
Yeah, I'd also like to bring it back to, just age and developmentally appropriate. I think, especially in terms of the TPA, where we do have that part A, where we really can talk about our setting and our kiddos and their learning styles, their assets and their needs, and then crafting that rubric, like Zoltan said, that might include additional scaffolds, right? Kind of beyond the language of the standard itself, right? Or it might tie more closely to some IEP goals or some functional goals that the assessor is going to be made aware of, right, before they get to those sections of the TPA. So I do think for specific kiddos or classrooms that we may see some more rubrics kind of like that, right, where it's going to go and look a little bit deeper beyond the standards and may break down to more of a task analysis piece that you can kind of hook into.
Okay, thank you.
And I would also say, in general, the younger the students are that our candidates are working with, the simpler the rubric is. So, we might have a rubric where we're assessing 2 or 3 learning goals, but we don't need to see the students using the entire rubric on those video clips. Just one piece of evidence of them looking at one aspect of their work and being really supported and understanding that part of the rubric is what we need to see. So again, with the TPA, what we're looking for is one piece of evidence for each of those constructs. So if we see them modeling one little part of a rubric and supporting a student in understanding how to use that one small part, that's sufficient to count as evidence.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Heather, as well, for the addition. Okay. Other thoughts that are coming to folks? Other struggles that you're seeing? Thank you for that one, Beth. That's one that comes up frequently. Okay, let's see. All right, well, if we are out of questions or thoughts, I think we can go ahead and wrap our session for today. Alan, Andrea, and Isabella, if you have a final thought, final words for the group.
No, just thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say thank you all for your time and coming in, and it's, just keep doing that good work with those candidates that you're working with. And thank you for all, enjoying and engaging today with the topics.
Yes, ditto. Thanks for the ongoing conversation, because we know this will Keep going and growing.
And I'm putting my email in the chat right now. I would love it if you all have any resources that you work with your candidates with, such as what Andrea and Alan provided for us on that document. Anything, any sort of organizing resources that you have for them, any examples that you have for them. If you could email me those, I would love to add those to the Google folder so we get a nice shared resource going here on this important question. And we will be posting this recording to the YouTube channel within the next few days.
Sultan, someone in the chat, Laura, asked if you could
Yep.
reshare the folder. Her chat
Yep.
disappeared.
I will do that. There we go. And again, I will comb through the resources that are in there. It's very comprehensive and useful.